In one of the TV shows Hannah and I were watching, there was a pastor being portrayed discussing a really tough issue. And as we were watching, I was thinking about all the times that I've seen Christians or pastors portrayed in TV shows and pop culture. Now the reality is if we put all those together, it wouldn't be a very fun list to go through. There'd be a lot of awkward and painful discussions about theology. There'd be misrepresentations about what Christians believed and what people who were Christians did. And as you think about that, it becomes very obvious that the word Christian carries a lot of baggage in the world we live in. Because in the culture we live in, the word Christian is no longer what it meant when Christianity was a grassroots movement, or when people were sitting in tiny little living rooms talking about Jesus back at the early church. Instead, Christianity is now a title or a convenient grouping of people for anything vaguely religious. Christianity no longer carries the meaning as a word. Instead, it's some sort of weird Christendom that we participate in because we're a nation that defines ourselves as. As we think about that, it seems like it's time to go back to when we were first called Christians, back to the church in Acts, as they deal with the issue of Greeks and Jews. The Jerusalem church made all of the decisions in Acts. They were the church that monitored when people talked about Jesus. They were the church that monitored when people were going on missionary trips. And the reason is because they wanted to make sure people were talking about Jesus good. They wanted to make sure that people weren't telling other people about Jesus in the wrong way. And so as they do this, they begin to grow into this boundary that they had created. You see, only Jews were allowed to be Christians. Only Jews were allowed to follow Christ. And so as they deal with this issue, Peter comes onto the scene and tells the church about his vision of the sheet. A sheet where he's told to eat unclean animals, where God literally tells Peter, all of my people are welcome. And as the Jerusalem church reacts to this, there's a church in Antioch. A church in Antioch that has begun to do community with both Greeks and Jews. They had begun to allow the gospel to reach across the biggest boundary, a boundary that stretched across religion, beliefs, language, culture, any of the major boundaries you could imagine. And as they do this, they send Barnabas up to make sure that this is really what Jesus is. And as they do this, at the very end of this section, it reads, "It was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians." You see, they didn't call themselves Christians. Instead, the people of Antioch looked at this remarkable church. They looked at this church that was meeting with both Jews and Gentiles in a tiny little living room and said, that is a new type of Christian. They called themselves learners, methetos, learners or disciples. They called themselves learners of Christ. And when the people saw what was happening as they were learning about Christ, they saw a new type of human. A type of human that chose to cross boundaries. That chose to overcome the boundaries that had been put there. And yet, as we use the word Christian, it's almost as if we're creating a new boundary. Creating a boundary for the gospel, that it can't reach past something. So the question that we ask as we use the word Christian, as we define ourselves as Christians, is what boundaries can we take down? What boundaries can we work across as we use that word to define us? The very word Christian should force us to question any boundaries we have put up. Should force us to reconsider any walls that stand in between us and people who need the gospel. The very word Christian was people outside of the church looking at people who were of Christ, who were from Christ, and calling them Christianos, or literally from Christ. How can we live that again?